the theological sector, we've had older residential students who've been studying full-time. We've had older part-time students who've been working and studying alongside their work in the courses, and we've had younger full-time students who have been residential in the colleges, and those have been the sort of typical three categories of theological ordinands and students. In the higher education sector more generally, we've had specialist institutions like the Open University and Birkbeck College and Mitchell University who've catered for the part-time student constituency, and then we've had the remainder of the sector, the remainder of the universities who specialise largely in campus-based universities and full-time residential students, even if the university itself isn't sort of campus-based like some of the big ones like Exeter or Warwick would be. We've still got residential students who are full-time there. Now, we're getting to the point now, because of the student fees, that more and more of the full-time students are needing to work alongside their studies. So we're getting a blurring of the boundaries between the full-time and the part-time, even if the full-time students are considered to be full-time and they're face-to-face and they're residential, they are still working. Many of them are still working alongside their studies, which in many ways makes them very similar to the part-time constituency. So the big difference is simply whether the students are living on campus or whether they're living off campus and they're living with their families and they're, whatever they are. But even then, we've got a blurring because many students won't be living on campus for the whole of their 3 years. They'll live on campus often for their first year, and then they'll move into the town where the university is. They'll take a flat, they'll live with their peers, etc. So we get into a situation where actually the difference between the full-time and the part-time students is very small indeed. I really only...
You're standing in front of the...
I'm sorry.
Thank you.
And I think it's going to erode more and more. Part of my talk today is predictions, and you can challenge my predictions. I've got quite a lot of predictions, but one of my predictions is that this difference between the full-time and part-time students is going to erode. It will erode even more once the government gets the teaching evaluation framework in place, and then the universities are able to charge whatever they like, so long as they've got a good TEF score. Well, not quite whatever they like, it'll be managed, but they will be able to charge even more than the £9,000. And so we're moving to a stage where I think the difference between part-time and full-time students is going to change. The real advantage of that is that it introduces a lot of the potential for a lot of flexibility of provision, and that's the purpose of my talk. In a full-time situation, it's really quite difficult to be genuinely flexible. In a minute, I'll take you to what I'm talking about in terms of flexibility. But basically, when you've got full-time, face-to-face, everything is organised. You have a beginning of a class, you have a big end of a class, you have a scheduled class, all related to the vicinity, so it's all relating to rooms and bookings and classrooms and availability. It's relating to teaching staff who can only be in one place at a time, so this person can only be here at that time, therefore they can't be there at that time. So everything in a face-to-face context, especially campus-based, tends to be inflexible. The minute we get into the part-time domain, the flexibility opens up enormously, and I think that's going to be a real characteristic of higher education in the future, and I would suggest that it's going to be a real characteristic of higher education in the future, of the theological sector in the future. So here we've got non-traditional learners, which is again very much what a lot of you people will be engaging with, the non-traditional learners, the people who are employed or retired, both when I was working at London Bible College and also at Oxford Brookes. I had students ranging from the age of 18 to 88. 88, I think, was our oldest students. And these are people who had a whole range of different reasons why they wanted to study. So we had some who were wanting to get their foot into an ordination course, so they were just doing some preparation in advance of going forward for ordination. Others wanted to be RE teachers, others were prisoners. We had one Muslim prisoner who wanted to learn about Christianity so he could shoot it down. We had mission partners, we had people who were just doing it for interest, we had people who wanted to play a greater role in their churches, but not in any sort of recognised fashion, just in a more informed fashion. So we employed, retired, those are the sort of the key non-traditional learners. You're waving at me.
Yeah, can I just add one word I'd like to add to that from my experience is people whose first language is not English.
Also, yes, increasingly now,
Yeah.
isn't it? Absolutely increasingly now. And those also come into the non-traditional learners. Thanks, Jan. Yeah, absolutely. They're over 35 and they do require flexibility. I don't know if any of you have done studies while you've been working, but you need your own flexibility, don't you? And you need to have that facility to study at a time and a place which is convenient to you. And that links with pace. So you need to have flexibility of being able to work at your own pace, and sometimes going faster, sometimes going slower. And a little bit later on I'll tell you what I introduced at Brooks, which was really quite revolutionary. But this is what I'm talking about by flexibility. It's the ability to make decisions about what you learn, when you learn, where you learn, and at what pace you learn and how you learn, whether it is electronically or whether it's paper-based or whether it's face-to-face or whether it's a mixture of all of those. The second blurred boundary that I think we're seeing increasingly in higher education is this one. It's a blurred boundary between face-to-face and online. Typically, when the online environment started to come on, everybody just associated it with paper-based distance learning. So paper-based distance learning has always been separate from face-to-face. They've always been two different beasts. This one's been fantastic. This one's been only if everybody, only if you really have to at the very last resort, because it's the only possible thing that you can ever do. But it really isn't up to scratch. And it's a great shame that you have to do this, because we all know that you'd much prefer to be here doing the face-to-face residential. But okay, this has now got some credence, and of course the advent of the Open University really raised the credibility and the learning experience of paper-based distance learning. When online came in, it just, the assumption was online will be supplementing or just taking over, superseding the paper-based distance learning. We never imagined until 10 years ago how much online was going to impact the face-to-face, the real face-to-face, the residential. And it seems to me that these two things are now starting to come together. We've used the term blended quite a lot, which has often meant things like you can do some homework, or you can do some advanced preparation online out of the classroom, and then you'll come into the classroom and you'll have the typical face-to-face thing. But the two things remain very separate. And I think what we're saying now is a real blurring of the two. And Ken and I were just talking about this, the meaning of blended learning. But I think we're seeing now more and more this sense that the two things are coming together. So, for example, Nearpod is offering a much more blended experience for you. It's coming into the classroom, the technology is coming into the classroom, and it's enhancing your learning, I hope, if you weren't having these problems. But in principle, the idea is that the technology is enhancing the learning inside the classroom, as well as outside the classroom. So technology is no longer in one place and not in the other. It's everywhere. It's absolutely everywhere. So when you merge face-to-face with, when you merge part-time with full-time, and now we merge the technology and the notions of face-to-face and online, which are no longer separate. They are very, very much interlinked, interconnected, all into the whole learning procedure. We're getting a very different landscape in which to operate, both in the non-theological higher education sector and in theology. And then put alongside that, it seems to us that we have a third blurred boundary, which is something that's totally outside anybody's control, but again, it's largely to do with the technology, and it's a blurred boundary between globalisation and time. The use of the technology is allowing us to study wherever we want. And not only to study wherever we want, but to work wherever we want. My 4 years in higher education, I was a home-based worker. The HEA is based in York, and I live in Oxford. And through the technology, I was allowed to, and a lot of other people, we were home-based workers. We had to go to York once a month, just because they thought it was good for us to see each other in real life. But only once a month we were contractually required to go to York. The rest of the time, we had our HEA computers, and I would log in, just as you're used to doing. We would log in through the link, and we would have meetings, 10 or 12 of us, some of whom were in York, some of whom were home-based, and they were perfectly effective, and it actually made our meetings in York all the more joyful, because we actually went and we loved seeing each other, but the meetings were extremely effective. We're seeing that happening in the employment environments, in the work environments, across the globe. People are taking their devices and they can work from wherever they want. So, for example, I went to a book launch in London, 2 authors of the book launch, of the book, and neither of them was present. One of them was in New Zealand, he'd had to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to attend the launch. The other one was in San Francisco. I can't remember what time she had to get up, but you can imagine what the time differences were. The launch was taking place at 6 o'clock in UCL in London, and there were a good 20 or 30 people present in that place. But the 2 authors of the books in different places. We can do it because they could Skype in, they can do all sorts of things. Globalisation is eroding this notion of place and location, etc., etc. And it goes with time. So given that book launch, we're no longer working in the 24/7, well, we're working in the 24/7 environment. We're no longer dividing up our time into 8 hours of work, 8 hours of sleep, and the remaining 8 hours sort of spread around doing family and leisure and whatever. We're not there any longer. We are just not there any longer. And so we've got blurring boundaries of people on the move, people working from home, people studying from home, people working when they want, a 24/7 culture, and it comes back to this, doesn't it? It comes back to this article. Is he actually doing something that is horrific, or is he actually just moving with the times? Is he actually making this environment work for him? And we can come back to discuss that in a moment or two. But it's this notion of nothing is static, nothing is the same any longer. We've got blurring boundaries, everything's sort of mixing up, and it really poses a question mark as to what's happening in the education sector. Now, this is where you may find it useful to have your computers in front of you, because the writing on this is not very clear if you're looking at the screen. If you can't see, move to somebody next to you, perhaps, who can see it. At the Higher Education Academy, we undertook last year to bring out 6 national frameworks for the themes that the Academy felt were the most important themes in higher education at the moment. And this was my flexible learning framework. And I'll just talk you through what we mean by flexible learning. So this was my work. It went out to the sector. We held a couple of sector-wide events with people who were particularly working on flexible learning, came and gave some interaction, etc. So we were able to adjust it and amend it. But you can see that in the centre here we've got obviously flexible learning. Then we've got 4 areas around. We've got personal flexibility here. So in order for flexible learning to be working, people need themselves to be flexible. You need to have sort of a flexible mindset, an ability to sort of shift and change and to roll with the punches and to adapt and to adjust and to take opportunities when they arise in case they don't arrive, in case they don't arise at another point. So this notion of personal flexibility was really important. Here we've got institutional agility, and we noticed that in fact it was impossible to be flexible in an institution unless the institution itself was able to be agile. And that means having an infrastructure, a system of administration, a system of student registrations, a system of logging assessments and assignments, a system of not forcing students necessarily to come to the same place at the same time every week with the same lecturer, etc. So it's a system whereby there's an agility which is inbuilt into the institution's infrastructure. And that is absolutely key to the notion of flexible learning. Then we've got learner choice, and you've got the 4 choices that we identified in the next ring out. So that the choices are students deciding how they want to learn. Is that going to be online? Is that going to be face-to-face? Is it going to be full-time? Is it going to be part-time? All of these things that I'm saying are blurring away, but there's still choices at the moment that students need to make. What they're going to learn. Okay, we can talk in big terms. We can say they're going to learn theology, they're going to learn about youth ministry, they're going to learn a big topic. But in fact, if you take that down a level or two, then we're getting to the point now where students can say, well, actually, it's not just theology that I want to learn. I'd like to do theology, and in my case, it was theology in education. Or can I do theology in psychology? A friend of mine is doing that in Melbourne. Can I do the theology? My friend in Melbourne. Can I do the theology at Melbourne Bible College? Or it's Melbourne School of Theology, and the psychology through La Trobe University. Can I get those two things to mix and match? Can I do them together? Can I do this module because I have a particular interest in this because a family member suffers from this particular psychological condition, so I'm really keen to do that module. How can I combine all of these things for my interests? So the what they learn is it's not just the big subject discipline, but it's even a modular level, and that's quite challenging for institutions to provide. When? So when are they going to learn? Is it just evenings? Can it be of their choice? Now that they've got their mobile devices, can they actually learn whenever they want? Whenever they want. So long as we've provided the wherewithal, that means that they can access it on their devices. So they are looking to ask that one of the choices is for a student when they learn. And similarly where they learn. So the two things, the when and the where, go together really. Do they learn at home? Do they learn on the tube when they're commuting? Do they learn, where do they study? So it's very much up to them. I'm not going to talk you through all of the rest of it, but the key thing here was balanced pragmatism. And that was saying really, it's all very well saying that student-centeredness is giving students all of these choices, how, what, when, where. Very student-centered. Very much giving the students the power, the control over their learning. But for an institution, it can be an absolute nightmare. It can be an absolute nightmare. It's expensive. The more choices, the more individualisation you give to students, the more expensive it becomes. So there's already a cost factor built in there. Secondly, there's really competing interests. For an institution normally to be effective, efficient, and cost effective, they need everybody to be doing the same thing. They need homogeneity. When you've got everybody doing the same thing, in the same place, at the same time, it's easy to manage. It's economical, it's easy to manage, you know where everybody is, and it becomes, we've got 25 people here who are all doing the same thing, and we all know where we stand. The minute I say to you, like, what would you like to do, what would you like to do, what would you like to do, the whole thing gets absolutely chaotic and completely out of hand. And the institution finds it very difficult to manage that. And so in recognition of the fact that a student-centred approach is desirable, but causes real problems for the institution, we've gone for this term balanced pragmatism, where we actually say student-centred learning is viable only up to a point. It's only up to the point that the institution can manage to put it into place. So there are things that are desirable, but it's got to be done in negotiation with the institution.
Can I just interrupt for a moment?
Yeah, please.
I mean, I work both in a small ministry training course and a large university. And I see the large university subject of those constraints that you describe. In the small ministry training course, the reason why we would have students together doing the same thing at the same time would be an educational rather than a logistical one, that we want the students to learn from each other as a group,
Yeah.
rather than because,
Yeah.
It seems to me there's this very individualised
Yeah.
ethos that you're pointing us towards actually could lose a lot of value.
We'll come on to that, and I fully agree with you, and it's particularly relevant to theology. I think that ethos is something is very, very dearly held in the theological sector, and I don't want to rubbish it, and I don't want to rubbish it either for theology or for the wide, the mainstream non-theological sector, and I don't think we are. And I think that's where the balanced pragmatism comes in. Actually, it's saying, there's a point where complete student individualisation is impossible, and it's also counterproductive, and it doesn't work. So there's a point when the students need to get together face to face, etc. But this was the sort of framework that we developed for flexible learning. And if you're interested in looking at student-centred approaches to teaching and learning, this is an article that I find very useful, mostly because of its simplicity. It's a really nice article. Again, you can see it on your screens, you can't see it on the top here. It's written, I think it's 2004, and it's two people from University College Dublin. And basically they're saying that there's three key words for student-centred learning. One is power, the next is choice, and the last is being active participants in their learning. The power is basically the notion of students as partners in their learning. So having the power to engage with the staff, having the power to say this is what we would like to do and not like to do, this is what's relevant to us and what's less relevant to us. So there's sort of power of bringing the students on board with the decision making that takes place about teaching and learning. The second one is a student choice, and that goes back to the flexible learning framework that I've just introduced you to. And the third was being actively participative in their learning, doing really what I'm not doing with you today, which is asking you to sit and listen. And basically, this is again where Nearpod hopefully comes into its own, managed a little bit better, that students are more actively participating in their courses. Yes.
Yes, can I just ask? I mean, these things that are coming up now, like this PDF and the earlier website, they will all be disappearing when we're done with the.
Just type in the code. And
I can go back to
that. You can go back,
okay,
yeah.
But you can download that PDF.
Yes, you
straight.
Of course.
Yes. Right. Straight away from it.
Yeah, but I'm in control of this. So I mean, if I actually end the session and the code disappears, then you wouldn't be able to get it. But I won't do that.
So can we re-access this thing later?
Yes.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes. So that was another advantage of it. Yes.
Just slightly concerned that, in a sense, I'm caricaturing a little bit, but you've summarised into one article a kind of decades-long discussion with, those names like Piaget and Dewey and all those great educationalists about how we teach and how we learn.
Yeah.
And my concern is that the technology is driving the process, as opposed to saying our understanding of learning is X, and the technology can apply that. So what I'm not hearing is a kind of somewhat theoretically based approach, which says we know that students learn like this, and there's a whole raft of theory behind that from the educational world, and etc. etc. And I wonder how you would respond to that, particularly as you said your interest was in theology and education.
Yes, that's right.
How does that great corpus of work?
Yeah, it's a wonderful question. How long have we got? I think we're going to have to come back to that. Just as a brief response, I think the notion of student participation in what's going on takes us straight back to Dewey and experiential learning. So I think we are in a much better place actually today with the technology than we were, in a sense. A group of people sitting listening to a lecturer who talks for anything up to an hour is not really going to honouring the work of people like Dewey and Piaget, etc. So this notion of student participation is moving on. I think it's interesting also what the relationship between theory and practice is, and where do we start on that cycle? And I've been doing quite a lot of reading of Jennifer Moon's work on reflection recently, and applying it to theology and theological reflection. And interesting to note Jennifer Moon's comment that David Kolb's cycle is totally theoretical and it's never been tested empirically, and the same thing with Schoen's work. And she doesn't rubbish them, that's not true, but she does comment that they are entirely theoretical and they are not based on empirical research. So this relationship between theory and practice. So who says what's good learning? Is it the theorists or who is it? Is it the learners?
Who says how people learn? Because that's also the question, isn't it? The whole learning styles debate.
That's right. That's right.
Alison, I like your phrase balanced pragmatism.
Yes.
I've been living in total immersion of blurred boundaries for the last 10 months, and it's a complete nightmare.
Is it?
I'm completely distracted 24/7, rather than multitasking in a successful way. It's become total distraction, and I need to find a smarter way of clumping time.
Yes. Shall I wasn't going to tell you this. Can't remember this. I wasn't going to go into this. No, it's not a secret. I wasn't going to go into this level of detail. When I was at Brooks, we had, it wasn't a large cohort of students, it was about 125 students. But paper-based distance learning, moving into online learning, and they needed a lot of flexibility. And of course the university was a large university, about 20,000 students, all homogenised, so everything based on everybody doing the same thing at the same time, in the same way, etc., etc. And I wanted to introduce a system where my students could enrol whenever they wanted, work at the pace they wanted, do whatever they want, when they wanted, etc., etc. And I had an old gentleman who said, had a retired gentleman, and he knew he was doing this course just for interest, but he was absolutely loving it, and he knew that his wife was going to go into hospital for a serious operation, and when she came out of hospital he was going to need to be her full-time carer for at least 3 months, and he was really worried that he was going to fall behind in his studies because it just wasn't going to work for him. We were able to introduce, and I'll tell you in a minute how we did this, we were able to introduce a system where the only big things that Brooks would not allow us to do was to break the rule that a Cert HE had to be completed in 3 years, a Dip HE had to be completed in the next 3 years, and the full BA had to be completed in a total of 8 years, so an additional 2 years. That was the only things that Brooks really were absolutely intractable, that's it. Fine. So he said, well, we'll work with that, but inside that we're going to see if we can manipulate the system. And so what we did, we scrapped the deadlines for all of the assessment of our students. Normally they had a starting date, and they had a finish date, and that after the finish date of the module, there was a point of an assessment. We scrapped all of that. No starting date, no finish date, no assessment points for any of the modules. A student could enrol at any point of the year, any date of the year, a student could enrol as long as the university was open to receive their applications. And they could choose any module that they wanted in any choice at any point within each of those levels. And the key thing to this, well, there are two key things to this. One was that we put into place 6 assessment weeks that were spread throughout the year. And the students knew that they could submit their work for assessment at any point during that year, but they would be marked at one of those 6 assessment weeks. So they knew when the work was going to be marked. The staff knew, and this was the balance, so the students knew that they could submit it at any point in time, but the staff knew when they got their marking load. So they only had 6 weeks when they were having to be marked, and they could block those out in their calendars. The continual enrolment, the university said, no, we don't do continuous enrolment. We can't possibly do continuous enrolment. That's out of the question and absolutely impossible. So we allowed the students to do continual enrolment, but we said to the university, the lowest, the most frequent amount of time that the university would allow us to register students was monthly. So a student would submit their application, let's say on March the 15th, and we would tell the university that they'd enrolled on April 1st. It gave them 2 weeks of access to materials in advance of them being enrolled for with the course. It gave them 2 weeks when they had to wait before they got their library cards and they got their, all the rest of it. They were happy with that. And so for the university's purposes, we were obeying their systems by having a monthly enrolment, but for the students' perspective, they weren't. So for my retired gentleman, he was able to then fast track, so he allowed them to do two modules at a time. He could fast track. We actually possibly gave him special dispensation to do 3 modules at the same time. It meant that on an assessment week, you could submit assessment for 3 modules at the same time. Fast track right up to the point that his wife went into hospital. He could drop everything for the 3 months whilst he was caring for him. He could pick up again, and he'd lost nothing. And it worked really well. Worked really, really well.
I just wondered whether you thought about, could he have joined the group from home by his wife's bed on Facebook?
This was before. This was before
it
was before online. I think we probably do it differently now.
Right.
Well, I think it was before online. It was in the days when VLEs were just coming into their own, and the VLE was the second really crucial thing.
Right.
So we'd got our VLE there, and it made he could log into that, and he could feel that he was part of the cohort and part of the overall system. But because of course we'd got continuous enrolment, so there was no sense of cohort. So the cohort was enormous. The cohort started from Module 1 Year 1 or Module 1 Level 4 through up to PhD. And the peer-to-peer learning that was taking place was enormous. And I can talk to you all sorts of things about how we managed that. But that was the balanced pragmatism, trying to actually say, well, this is what the university can cope with, and this is what our staff need to manage, and this is what our students are looking for. And it was very much this question of sort of trying to work down from the university and up from the student to the point where it seemed to work, and it was very effective. Just a thought. My key messages to you then, I've got lots more, but I think we're going to stop here. The key messages here is that I think fully online learning has come of age, and when I say fully online learning, I do mean fully online learning. So we are seeing increasingly many degrees where, just like the old paper-based distance learning, you can do a full degree just by online learning. Liverpool University is working with Laureate, the American company which specialises in online learning. They're extremely proud of that partnership, and it seems to be a partnership that's working extremely well. And everything is done wholly online. They've got a Doctor of Education programme, 300 students, international students, all spread around the world. They don't meet in a face-to-face context. and they've come together in the same way as I did for my with my colleagues at York.